In today's review, we are taking a look at a martial art for Southeast Asia modified for modern use. Hi guys, my name is Joe and welcome to my channel, Fighting Words, the Martial Arts Library. On this channel I review martial arts books and I talk about other martial arts related subjects. The subject of today's review is going to be Silat For the Street by Burton Richardson. Now, Mr. Richardson has quite an extensive background in martial arts. He trained Jeet Kune Do under Dan Inosanto for ages. He was one of the original Dog Brothers. That's a full contact Kali stick fighting group. He has trained alongside some old school mixed martial arts legends like Enson Inoue. He's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's trained with quite a few people for quite a long time. Even done a few movie parts. So the subject of this book is taking Silat, which Mr. Richardson is a tremendous fan of and highly skilled in, and using the lessons that he has learned from training alongside people, for example, Enson Inoue, other combat sports professionals, and adapting the traditional techniques that he learned for perhaps a more modern setting. As part of his approach, he will note that Silat, in the introduction, it works best in the clinch, and as with just about everything, it also works best when you get some sparring in. And in this context, he will include things like throat grabs and groin slaps, which are signature moves of Silat, in his sparring sessions. Now, the first 3 chapters are sort of a continuation of the introduction. The first chapter is on principles. It covers a lot of sort of common sense stuff, like use leverage and assume that, the person you are engaged with is armed, things like that. The second chapter is on the difference between armed and unarmed Silat techniques. Silat is known for usually its variety of blade weapons, the Kris or Kiris in particular, which is a wavy bladed thrusting sword, dagger. And he takes this opportunity to make a distinction between the techniques one would use with and without those weapons. And finally, the third is just sort of overarching, goes over concepts about dealing with multiple attackers, as well as the use of progressive resistance. So all this is meant to sort of lay the framework for what the other parts of the book are going forward. Chapter 4 is on footwork, and many of the maneuvers will be familiar with most people. There's, of course, like the so-called box pattern. You also have the triangular footwork moving off at angles. He also includes some harimau ground movements. Harimau is a branch of Silat that, as I understand it, is meant to mimic the movements of a tiger, and a lot of it is very low to the ground. After that, we get to what I think is one of the more useful chapters in this book, and that is chapter 5, which is on entries. In these entries, there are a variety of ways to close and get into clinch range with the attacker. Some of these include some rudimentary trapping, slapping the guy's arms down. You have what's referred to as a split entry, so parrying the opponent's straight punch and entering with a punch yourself. There's also a few varieties of how to cover and crash. In other words, to lead with like the point of an elbow or something like that. So you're moving in sort of a defensive position. In military terminology, you might think of this as moving in behind a shield wall. And again, I think that this is important for everyone. This is a good chapter in Joe's giant omnibus of fighting. This would definitely be included. One of the most difficult things to do in combat is to get into a position where you can control someone while they are firing shots at you. And these entries are meant to address that. Now, Chapter 6 is on takedowns, which is something you'll see a lot of in the empty hand Silat work. Frankly, I am a bigger believer in some of these than others, but it should be noted that a lot of the takedown techniques here include controlling the head or neck or throat. In fact, there are several throat grab, maneuvers that are meant to set up takedowns or integral to the takedowns. There's also a number of foot sweeps, which again, Silat is sort of known for. He will also include some takedowns from things like kick catches from the ground. In this section, we can see him moving from like a seated cross-legged position, catching the kick, and then dumping the opponent. And then finally, toward the end of the chapter, we get a lot of combining the different takedowns together. So you begin with one, and for whatever reason that one fails, how to transition from that into another takedown. And Chapter 7 is another really excellent chapter in this book, and that deals with the clinch positions. And some of this will be familiar with those with a combat sports background. So, we'll have like the standard Thai plum kind of clinch, like a full bear hug clinch. But we will also get specific clinching techniques for, let's say, less than friendly encounters. For instance, grabbing the hair, grabbing the throat, that's another part of it. Things like tying up the arm and attacking the throat at the same time. So this takes an area where if you have a combat sports background, you've already got some familiarity with it. If you train something like Muay Thai or wrestling or judo, and is putting a little bit of stink on it, in the form of these other control methods. What should be obvious coming from his background, he does recommend in this chapter that one should combine training Silat with training MMA. I'm all for cross-training. The more you know, little rainbow, right? Chapter 8 shows some ideas from groundwork. Now, it's not so much about extensive techniques. Again, it's more ideas. These include like joint breaks, attacks from the guard, and similarly with the last chapter, he does recommend combining this training with combat sports training like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. There's also a lot in this chapter about the opponent being on the ground, the attacker being on the ground, and following through with your own strikes. There are parts of this I quibble with a bit. I mean, I absolutely respect his experience and his knowledge, but if I'm squatting down to elbow a guy in the head when he's already on the ground, that seems like there's a better way to do that. And some of the stuff he's showing is like, oh yeah, if you're in somebody's guard, just stick your thumbs in their eyes. Like, maybe. I mean, he at least acknowledges, like, if you're not careful, you're going to get armbarred. But, my 2 cents is the thing about ground fighting is you have to be in a position where you are in control of the fight before you can affect that kind of offense. So I appreciate him putting these ideas in. It would definitely be best utilized by someone who has some experience in this arena. And finally, Chapter 9 is we get tactics with a sarong. Mostly it consists of, whipping it around or throwing it over the guy's head. The sarong is a traditional garment worn in that part of the world. I am aware that from the particular school that he is from, it has been used as a type of weapon. I don't know why you would have a chapter on this weapon as opposed to maybe a bladed weapon, which, again, Silat is also known for, and I'm not going to carry a sarong with me, man. As far as the pros go, I think it has a lot of good fundamental self-defense strategies and tactics. Like I said, I really appreciate the chapters on entries, the chapter on clinch control, to a lesser extent, the one on the takedowns from the clinch. Some of those in particular I think are really good. And I do appreciate the emphasis on realism and cross-training. Realistically speaking, if you are training specifically for self-defense, you should be cross-training, so that you will not have a blind spot, right? So I do appreciate the overall tone, the list of tactics he gives, and like I said, some of the very specific chapters in here. As far as the cons go, I mean, I do nitpick a little bit with some of the techniques he included in here. Not a whole lot. I like the majority of them. I think if there's any downside, it's that some of the chapters could have been expanded a little bit more. I mean, it's over 100 pages as it is. It covers kind of a lot of ground, and some of the things that it covers really well, it does pretty well. But, for instance, using Silat on the ground, I don't think is going to work that well unless you are familiar with ground fighting and you are comfortable with controlling the attacker in that position. So that's one that sticks out in my mind. Maybe some of the takedown sections could have been expanded a little bit. I sort of got my mouth watering a little when he was showing, how to, combine the different takedowns, and I wish there had been more of that. But it's not too much of a con when the thing that I come down to is I wish there was more of this book to read. So, recommendations. Obviously, if you practice a system of Silat similar to the one that Mr. Richardson practices, I think that this would be a good guide for learning how to strip away the inessentials and learning how to focus on certain aspects of it that would be most useful for, unarmed self-defense stuff. I think in general, for self-defense, the concepts are good, like the overall concepts about, take into consideration that the guy might be armed and so on. I think those are good for anyone, in addition to, footwork, entries, takedowns, clinch work. Those 4 chapters work really well together. I think if you come in cold without any particular martial arts background, you could probably take some of that with you. I think if you do have a background in, a martial art that does a whole lot of clinching, that, in a sportive context, perhaps there are some things in here that you can use to, expand your arsenal, make it more street, include some of the dirty aspects to it. So, yeah, overall, I really like it. Again, I wish there'd been more to some of it. There's a couple of things here and there that I am a little dubious about. But on the whole, this is good for addressing some very specific tactics and techniques for self-defense, and I'm glad I have it. And if you're interested in that, you should get it too. I think this one is still in publication. So that's all I have for this week, and I'll see you guys later. Thank you.